I interviewed a former exorcist who said one entity could not be banished. Father Daniel Mercer checked the window before he checked the door. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that he checked it twice. He pulled the curtain aside, looked down at the wet parking lot, then let the fabric fall back into place. He stood there for another few seconds as if listening for something outside. Only then did he lock the door. "You came alone?" he asked. "Yes." "Did you tell anyone where you were going?" "No." "Did you send anyone the address?" "No." He nodded. "Good." The room was small, quiet, and deliberately ordinary. 2 chairs, a wooden table, a floor lamp, an old radiator ticking beneath the window, a crucifix hanging crookedly on the wall. There were no shelves of religious books, no holy water, no candles, no photographs of churches or people. For a man who had spent nearly 30 years investigating alleged possessions, Daniel Mercer seemed almost determined to remove religion from his surroundings. He was 71 years old. His hair was completely gray. His shoulders had the slight forward curve of someone who had spent years carrying something heavy. He wore a dark sweater over a white shirt. His hands shook when he sat down. Not badly. Just enough to notice. I placed my recorder on the table. His eyes went immediately to it. "You said I could record." "I said you could record the conversation." "That sounds like the same thing." "It isn't." I smiled. He didn't. I pressed the button. The red light came on. Mercer looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "If it starts recording by itself, don't listen to it." I stopped smiling. "Has that happened before?" "Yes." "What did you hear?" "I don't want to tell you." "Why?" "Because then you'll know what to listen for." I waited. He looked at the recorder again. "You understand that I don't expect you to believe me. I don't believe things just because someone tells me." "Good. That's probably why you agreed to talk to me." "No." He folded his hands. "I agreed because I don't have much time left." That sentence changed the atmosphere immediately. "How much time?" He shrugged. "Enough." I asked him why he had disappeared from public life. He had once been known within certain religious circles, not famous, not the kind of man whose face appeared on television, but people in the field knew his name. Daniel Mercer had spent years investigating alleged possessions in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and parts of New York. He had participated in more than 100 formal exorcism cases. He had worked with psychiatrists, neurologists, police officers, social workers, and clergy. He had witnessed people claiming to speak in voices that weren't their own. He had seen violent episodes. He had seen people recover after psychiatric treatment. He had seen families convinced their houses were haunted when the real problem was carbon monoxide. He had seen sleep paralysis mistaken for demonic attack. He had seen religious trauma mistaken for possession. He had also seen things he couldn't explain. But he never called those things demons. That was one of the reasons I wanted to interview him. "What made you leave?" I asked. He stared at his hands. "One case. The 1997 case." His fingers stopped moving. "You've read about it?" I found references. There shouldn't be references. "Why?" "Because the case was closed." "Was it?" He looked at me. "No." That was the first time his voice changed. Not louder, quieter. "The case was never closed." I leaned forward. "What happened?" He looked toward the window, then at the door, then back at me. "I have performed hundreds of exorcisms." He paused. "Only one thing ever refused to leave." Another pause. "And I don't think it was ever inside the person." That sentence became the center of the entire interview. I asked him to explain. He refused. Not immediately. He simply sat there, breathing slowly, while rain tapped against the window. Finally, he said, "If I tell you about the thing, you need to understand that this is fiction in the sense that none of what you're about to hear should be treated as a verified supernatural event." I nodded. He continued, "I am telling you a story about what happened to people who believed something was haunting them. That's an unusual distinction from a man who performed exorcisms. It took me 20 years to learn that distinction." He leaned back. "Most people who believe they're possessed aren't." "What percentage?" "I don't know. Most? Almost all." "Then what made this case different?" Mercer closed his eyes. "The people were normal." That answer surprised me. He opened his eyes. "People expect the victim to be strange, unstable, violent, obsessed with death. But the Voss family wasn't." He began with the family. Michael Voss was 39. He repaired industrial machinery at a paper mill outside Bellwether, Pennsylvania. His wife, Laura, was 36. She worked part-time handling medical billing. Their son, Ethan, was 13. Their daughter, Clara, was 8. They had lived in Bellwether most of their lives. They attended church occasionally. They had family dinners. They argued about money. Michael wanted to replace the roof. Laura wanted to save for a better car. Ethan was obsessed with baseball. Clara collected smooth stones from the creek behind their house. They were not a family waiting for something supernatural to happen. They were a family trying to live. In June of 1997, they bought a 2-story house on Briar Ridge Road. It had 3 bedrooms, a basement, a detached garage, and a porch facing a line of trees. The house was old, but not abandoned. The previous owners had lived there for more than 20 years. Nothing terrible was associated with it. No murders, no famous deaths, no missing children, no local legend. That mattered. Because if the house had been infamous, Mercer said, everyone would have interpreted ordinary events differently. The first month was completely normal. The family painted the living room. They replaced the kitchen cabinets. Clara chose yellow curtains for her bedroom. Ethan complained about them. Michael built a shelf for the garage. Laura planted flowers along the porch. Then the small things began. A kitchen chair appeared in the hallway. Nobody remembered moving it. They put it back. 2 days later, it was in front of Clara's bedroom. Michael blamed Ethan. Ethan blamed Clara. Clara blamed nobody. She simply said, "It likes that chair." Laura asked her what she meant. Clara shrugged. "I don't know." The family laughed about it. That was the first mistake, though Mercer didn't know it then. They gave the event a personality. They named the unknown. Not deliberately, not seriously, but they did. It. 3 days later, the chair was back in the kitchen. Then objects began disappearing. Michael's watch vanished from the bathroom. They found it inside the freezer. A set of keys disappeared from the kitchen counter. They were found inside a child's shoe in the hallway. Laura's scissors disappeared. They turned up beneath Ethan's pillow. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was destroyed. The objects were simply moved. Then one night, Laura heard Clara calling from upstairs. "Mom?" Laura was washing dishes. She dried her hands. "Coming." "Mom?" The voice came again, this time from the basement. Laura froze. She turned toward the basement door. "Clara?" No answer. Then she heard her daughter laugh. The sound came from the basement. Laura opened the door. The basement was empty. She turned around. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring. Laura asked, "Did you call me?" Clara looked up. "No. I heard you." Clara stared toward the basement, then she whispered, "That wasn't me." Michael searched the basement. Nothing. No speaker, no hidden person, no open window. Nothing. They blamed acoustics. Old houses made strange noises. They moved on. Then the dog began refusing to enter the basement. That was different. Animals noticed things. That was what Laura believed. Michael thought it was nonsense. The dog had always been nervous around dark rooms. Then one night, the dog stood at the basement stairs and growled. Not at the darkness. At the wall beside the stairs. Michael turned on every light. Nothing was there. The dog backed away. It would not go downstairs. The next morning, they found 3 words written on the basement wall. "Don't answer me." Michael was convinced Ethan had done it. He confronted his son. Ethan cried. Laura checked the handwriting. It resembled hers. Michael accused Laura. She denied writing it. The argument lasted nearly an hour. Then Clara entered the room. She looked at the wall. "That's not what it said yesterday." Everyone became silent. "What did it say?" Laura asked. Clara frowned. "I don't remember." That was the first clue nobody understood. The writing changed, not when they watched it. After they remembered it. Mercer told me he didn't know that at the time. He only learned it later. A security camera was installed after the basement door began opening by itself. The camera recorded nothing unusual for 6 nights. On the 7th night, at 2:13 a.m., the basement door opened. Slowly. It stopped halfway. Nothing entered, nothing left. After 12 seconds, it closed. Michael watched the recording several times. Then he noticed something. The timestamp jumped. 2:13:11, 2:13:12, 2:13:13, then 2:13:47. 34 seconds were missing. He blamed the camera. The next night, the same thing happened. 2:13. Door opens. 34 seconds disappear. The third night, the camera recorded something different. The door opened. A shadow moved across the wall. Michael assumed it was the door itself. Then the shadow moved in the opposite direction. He woke Laura. They watched the recording together. Neither could explain it. They didn't call the police. They didn't call the church. They still believed there was an ordinary explanation. That changed when Clara began waking at exactly 11:43 every night. She would sit upright in bed, her eyes open. She would stare toward the corner. Then she would say, "Someone is remembering." Laura asked who. Clara always answered, "I don't know." One night she added, "He's waiting for the right person." Laura asked, "What person?" Clara pointed toward the hallway. "You?" Laura's fear became something else after that. Not fear for herself, fear for her daughter. She took Clara to a pediatrician. The doctor found nothing unusual. A neurologist found nothing. A sleep specialist suggested night terrors. The family accepted that explanation. For 3 weeks, nothing else happened. Then the photograph appeared. It was a family photograph taken on the porch. Michael had set up a camera on a timer. They were all standing together. Michael, Laura, Ethan, Clara. The house behind them. Trees, blue sky, normal. The developed photograph showed one additional figure. Standing behind Michael, tall, thin, its face blurred. Michael assumed it was someone passing behind them. But there had been nobody there. He checked the negative. The figure was visible. He checked another print. The figure was still there. Then Laura noticed something. The figure was wearing Michael's coat. Michael was wearing that same coat in the photograph. The figure was wearing an identical one. Michael became angry. He accused someone of tampering with the photograph. The lab denied it. He took the photograph to a police officer. The officer shrugged. Probably a processing defect. Michael threw it away. The next morning, it was back on the kitchen table. He threw it away again. It returned. The third time, Laura burned it. The ash disappeared, not scattered, disappeared. One moment, the fireplace contained black fragments. The next, nothing. That was when Laura called Reverend Thomas Avery. Avery visited the house. He was a practical man. He didn't perform an exorcism. He didn't even bless the house immediately. He inspected it, checked the basement, checked electrical systems, asked about sleep patterns, asked whether anyone had recently changed medication, asked whether there were family conflicts. He found nothing. Then he spoke privately with Clara. She told him, "The man in the picture isn't a man." Avery asked what he was. Clara said, "He's the part that watches." Avery contacted the diocese. Daniel Mercer was assigned to investigate. He arrived on October 16, 1997. That date would become important later. At first, Mercer found almost nothing. He spent hours in the house. He inspected wiring, found mold, found evidence of rodents, found a faulty furnace. He concluded that many of the family's experiences could be explained. But he couldn't explain the photograph. He couldn't explain the missing 34 seconds in the security footage. And he couldn't explain why the basement wall contained handwriting matching Laura's from a letter she had written 11 years earlier. He interviewed everyone separately. Michael admitted he had been angry with Laura. Laura admitted she had begun doubting her own memory. Ethan said he had heard footsteps. Clara said nothing. Mercer finally asked her, "Do you think something is in this house?" She looked at him. "No." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't live here." "Where does it live?" Clara looked toward the basement, then at Mercer. "In people who remember." Mercer wrote that sentence down. He didn't tell anyone. That night, he stayed at the house. At 11:43 p.m., Clara woke. Mercer was sitting nearby. She stared at him. "You came before." He felt cold. "What do you mean?" "You came when you were young." Mercer laughed nervously. "I've never been here before." Clara shook her head. "Not here." "Where?" She pointed at him. "Inside." Mercer asked what she meant. Clara's face changed, not physically, emotionally. The expression became blank. Then she said, "Daniel Mercer." He had never told the family his full name. Clara continued, "You promised you wouldn't remember." Mercer stood. "Who told you my name?" She smiled. "You did." Then every clock in the house stopped. 11:43, Mercer's watch, the kitchen clock, the microwave, the wall clock. All stopped. The second hands continued moving, but time itself did not advance. Then something knocked from inside the basement wall. 3 times. Pause. 2 times. Pause. 3 times. Mercer opened the basement door. The knocking stopped. He stepped down. The wall was blank. Then he heard his own voice behind him. "Daniel!" He turned. Nobody. The voice came again. "Don't ask who I am." Mercer froze. Because he hadn't asked. Not aloud, not yet. But the question had been in his mind. "Who are you?" The voice answered it. "You already know." Mercer left the basement. He told the family the investigation was over. The next day, he searched church archives. He found nothing. Then he searched county records. That was where he found the farmhouse, 2 miles from the Voss property, burned in 1964. 3 people listed as dead. Mr. and Mrs. Bell. Their daughter, Ruth, 6 years old. Mercer drove there. The house was gone. Only a stone foundation remained. Beneath it, he found a concrete room that wasn't on any building plan. Inside were objects, dozens of them. Photographs, letters, watches, children's shoes, hospital bracelets, wedding rings. Things that belonged to strangers. On one wall, someone had written, "Everything that is remembered has a door." Mercer photographed the words. Then something else caught his attention. A child's drawing. A house, a door, a tall figure, and a boy standing beside it. The boy looked like me. Mercer didn't know me. He had never met me. But my face was there. On the back of the drawing was a date. October 16, 1997, and beneath it, not yet. Mercer returned to the Voss house. The exorcism began weeks later. But before it did, Clara disappeared. For 47 minutes, she was found in the basement, sitting beneath the writing. She was holding the photograph, the one that had been burned. Mercer asked where she found it. Clara answered. He gave it back. Who? She looked at Mercer. The person you haven't met yet. At night, Mercer wrote in his notes, "The family may not be the target." He underlined it, then wrote, "They may be witnesses." He didn't know how important that sentence would become. The formal exorcism was scheduled for November 4th. Mercer believed the entity was attached to Clara. He was wrong. He simply didn't know it yet. And when the prayers began, the thing inside the room did not scream. It laughed. Softly. Almost kindly. Then Clara opened her eyes. She looked directly at Mercer and said, "You're going to ask the wrong question again." The room had been prepared according to standard procedure. The windows were sealed. The furniture had been removed. A medical professional was present. Another priest stood beside Mercer. Michael and Laura were seated against the far wall. Clara was in the center. She was 8 years old, small, frightened, and completely exhausted. Mercer later told me that was what made the first 20 minutes so difficult. Nothing supernatural happened. Clara cried. She asked for her mother. She said she was cold. She complained about the lights. She behaved like a frightened child. The physician checked her pulse. Everything was normal. The priest began praying. Nothing happened. Then Clara became quiet. She looked at Mercer. "Can I go home?" "Yes," he said. "When?" "When this is finished." She smiled. "It won't finish." Mercer asked why. Clara looked at him. "Because you don't understand what you're doing." He continued the prayers. Clara closed her eyes. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. The room became silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where you become aware of your own heartbeat. Mercer said the silence lasted about 10 seconds. Then Clara opened her eyes. Her voice was normal. "Father?" "Yes?" "What's your father's middle name?" Mercer stopped. His father's middle name was Thomas. He had never told anyone in the room. Clara smiled. "You don't have to answer." Mercer stared at her. She continued. "Do you remember the creek?" He felt his stomach tighten. "Stop. You buried something there." "Stop. You were 9. The other priest asked Mercer what was happening. Mercer told him to continue praying. Clara laughed. Not loudly, just once. Then she said, "You always do that when you're afraid." Mercer asked, "Who are you?" The room changed. The lights went out. Clara stopped smiling. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then her voice came from somewhere behind Mercer. "That's the wrong question." Mercer turned. Nobody was there. The voice came again, this time from the physician. But the physician hadn't spoken. His lips were closed. That's the wrong question. The physician stumbled backward. Clara began crying. I don't want to do this. Mercer asked her who was speaking. She shook her head. He isn't inside me. That sentence should have ended the exorcism. Instead, Mercer continued. He believed it was deception. The entity wanted him to doubt, so he increased the prayers. The room became colder. Not freezing, just suddenly wrong. The crucifix on the wall moved slightly. Nobody touched it. The physician stepped closer to Clara. Clara, can you hear me? Yes. Do you know where you are? Yes. Who am I? Dr. Bennett. Good. What is your daughter's name? Bennett froze. He had never mentioned having a daughter. Clara continued. Rebecca. The physician's face went pale. She died 2 years ago. Clara looked at him. I know. Bennett backed away. Mercer stopped the procedure. He asked how Clara knew. Clara didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Michael. Do you still have the letter? Michael stared. What letter? The one you never sent. Laura looked at him. Michael's face changed. He had written a letter to his brother years earlier. He had never sent it. Nobody knew, except Michael. Clara turned to Laura. Do you still dream about the hospital? Laura began crying. Mercer asked what hospital. Laura said nothing. Clara whispered, You don't have to tell him. Then she looked at Mercer. But you already know. Mercer didn't, at least not consciously. He stopped the exorcism. The room remained silent. Then Clara spoke. Daniel, yes? You should leave. Why? Because it doesn't want me. Mercer looked at her. What does it want? She pointed toward him. You. Mercer stepped backward. No. Clara's face softened. It has been waiting. For what? For you to remember. The exorcism ended. Mercer left the room. He didn't sleep that night. He returned to the farmhouse. The concrete room was still there. The objects were still there. But one thing had changed. A photograph set on the floor. It showed a child beside a river. Mercer recognized the child. It was me, 8 years old. The date was October the 16th, 1997. He knew something about me that night. I had disappeared. For 3 hours, I had been found beneath the bridge. Mercer had seen the police report. He had never met me. But the photograph showed me standing beside the same dark figure. Mercer took the photograph. He didn't know why. He took it to the church. Then he made a copy. The original disappeared. The copy changed. At first, it showed only me. Then the figure appeared. Then Mercer appeared. Then something else. A second version of me. Older, adult, standing behind the child. Mercer destroyed the copy. It returned the next day. He destroyed it again. It returned again. That was when he realized the photograph wasn't documenting an event. It was responding to memory. Whoever looked at it could become part of the image. That discovery frightened him more than anything that happened during the exorcism. Because he had already looked, he was already part of it. The entity was not possessing Clara. It was using Clara to make Mercer look, to make him remember, to make him ask questions, to make him become a witness. Mercer returned to the Voss house. Clara was asleep. Laura sat beside her. Mercer asked Laura about the farmhouse. She said she had never heard of it. Then she remembered something, a dream. She had dreamed of the farmhouse years before they moved. She had never visited Bellwether before. She remembered a little girl, Ruth. Laura said the girl had asked her to hold something. What? A key. Mercer asked where it was. Laura said, "I don't know." Then she began crying. "Actually, I do." She pointed toward the basement. "It was here." Mercer searched the basement. He found nothing. But beneath a loose floorboard was a child's shoe. Inside the shoe was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was Laura's. The words were, "I remember the first door." Mercer asked Laura if she had written it. She said no. He asked Clara. Clara was still asleep. Mercer wrote in his notes, "The house is not haunted." Then he crossed it out. He wrote, "The house is a memory." He crossed that out too. Finally, "The people are the location." That remained. For the next several weeks, Mercer investigated every object found beneath the farmhouse. He traced the histories. A wedding ring belonged to a woman who had disappeared in 1972. A child's shoe belonged to a boy who had died in 1968. A cassette belonged to a woman who claimed something had followed her through dreams. A hospital bracelet belonged to a patient who had insisted that doctors were replacing her memories. The cases were not identical, but they shared one feature. Every person had encountered something they could not explain, and every person had told someone else. That was the pattern. The entity needed a witness. Then it needed a second witness. Then a third. Not possession. Transmission. Mercer found the oldest object, a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph from 1941. A family stood outside a farmhouse. The building was not the Voss house. It was not the Bell farmhouse. It was older. The photograph contained no figure, until Mercer remembered the case. Then the figure appeared. He stopped looking at the photograph. He began covering it. He stopped talking. He tried forgetting. For almost 17 years, he succeeded. Then the dreams began. In every dream, he stood inside the farmhouse. A woman sat in a chair. Her face was hidden. She said, "You remember me?" Mercer always woke before she finished. Until one night, she said, "You promised." He woke standing in front of a mirror. His hand had written my name on the glass. He didn't know my name. But there it was, my full name. That was why he finally agreed to meet me. Not because he wanted to tell the story, because the story had found me. The email came from my address. 3 days before our interview. I had no memory of sending it. The message said, "I think I remember the door." Mercer knew immediately. The chain had reached its next stage. He agreed to meet me because he believed he could stop it. He was wrong, because the interview itself became another ritual, not religious. Narrative, memory, question, answer, recognition. Every time I asked him about the entity, I gave it another connection. Every time he answered, he gave it another memory. And when I asked him, why couldn't it be banished? He finally said, "Because you cannot exorcise a memory." I thought that was metaphorical. It wasn't. The entity had no single body, no fixed name, no physical location. It lived in the act of remembering. It could imitate anyone whose memory it had touched. That was why it could speak with different voices. That was why it knew secrets. That was why it could appear in photographs. That was why it could predict things. It wasn't predicting. It was accessing memories of people who had already experienced them. The apparent supernatural knowledge came from somewhere else. The entity existed across a network of remembered moments. That was why its power had limits. It could not know what nobody knew. It could not create facts. It could only access memories. And that was why the entity wanted certain people. People with strong emotional memories. people whose memories could survive. Children, mothers, priests, witnesses, people who told stories, people who refused to forget, people like Mercer, people like me. Mercer realized the Voss family had been chosen because Clara's memory was unusually stable. She remembered things other people forgot. She could recall dreams from years earlier. She could describe conversations she had overheard once and repeat them word for word. She was not possessed. She was an archive. The entity used her as a living index, and Mercer had made the worst possible mistake. He had tried to interrogate it. He had given it questions. He had given it attention. He had given it himself. The final exorcism was not an exorcism at all. It was an exchange. The entity had wanted Mercer to become the witness who carried the Voss case forward. And he did. For decades. Until the day he met me. The final night of the interview, Mercer told me something he had never told anyone. He had known about me before I was born. Not because of prophecy, because of a memory. His mentor had shown him an old photograph. A child beside a river. My mother was pregnant with me at the time. The photograph had been taken years before my birth. Mercer had never understood it. Until 1997. Until I disappeared. Until the entity appeared behind me. He finally understood. The photograph had not predicted my birth. It had remembered it. That distinction terrified him. I asked what the entity wanted from me. Mercer said, "It wants the memory you left behind." "What memory?" "The one you buried." "Where?" "Under the bridge." We returned to Bellwether, and beneath that bridge, we found the box. Inside was a key and a note. "You promised to remember." Mercer looked at it, then at me. "You made a promise when you were 8. To whom?" "I don't know." "You said I would return." "Yes." "Why?" "Because the entity knew you would." Then we heard the footsteps. 3, pause, 2, pause, 3. Mercer closed his eye. "It knows we're here." A child's voice came from the darkness. My voice. "You finally remembered me." Mercer grabbed my arm. "Don't answer." The voice came again. "Daniel." Mercer said nothing. Then it used my voice. "Open the door." A wooden door appeared in the basement. Where no door had been, no hinges, no handle, just a black outline in the concrete. Mercer stared at it. "I've seen this before." "When?" "When you were 8. And then I remembered. I had opened it. The memory returned all at once. I was 8 years old. Rain was falling. I had been sitting beside the river. I remembered the police. I remembered my parents. I remembered being afraid. Then I remembered the house. It had stood where there was no house. The windows were dark. The door was open. Inside was a hallway. At the end was another door. I had entered. A woman sat in a chair. She looked like Laura Voss. But she wasn't Laura. She was every person who had ever been forgotten. Every face I couldn't recognize, and every voice I couldn't place. She said, "Remember me." I asked who she was. She said, "I am what remains when everyone else forgets." Then the man appeared behind me. He was tall. He wore a dark coat. His face had no features. He said, "You shouldn't have come." I asked why. He said, "Because you can remember." Then he showed me the room. Objects. Photographs, letters, keys, watches, personal belongings. Every object belonged to someone who had encountered him. Every object carried a memory. He asked me to choose one. I chose the key. He asked me why. I said, "Because it opens something." He laughed. Then he said, "You'll understand later." I remembered the second door. I opened it. Behind it was darkness. Then I saw myself, older, standing in the doorway. He said, "You're going to come back." I asked when. "When you know my name," I said. "What is your name?" He leaned close, then whispered, "Whatever you remember me as." The memory stopped. I opened my eyes. Mercer was staring at me. "What did you see?" I told him. He looked devastated. "That's what I was afraid of." "What?" "It doesn't have a name." "Then what is it?" Mercer shook his head. "It's a pattern." The realization was worse than any demon story could have been. The entity wasn't a creature with a hidden name. It was a phenomenon that had developed intention. A self-sustaining intelligence formed from human memory. It could only exist through people. It could not be summoned. It could not be killed. It could not be banished. Because it had no single location. It was wherever its witnesses remembered. The exorcism failed because the priests believed they were removing an invader, but they were actually strengthening a network. Every prayer gave the entity another piece of human attention. Every question gave it another connection. Every attempt to identify it gave it a stronger identity. And the more Mercer tried to destroy it, the more he became its historian, its witness, its memory. I asked, "Then why does it frighten people?" Mercer answered, "Because fear makes memories stronger." That was the final piece. Fear wasn't its food. Fear was preservation. People remember what frightens them. The entity understood that. It didn't need to kill. It needed people to remember. That was why I never simply murdered the Voss family. That was why it never killed Mercer. That was why it kept Clara alive. That was why it let me leave when I was 8. It wanted the memory to survive. The farmhouse had been destroyed. The Voss house had been abandoned. The people had died or moved away, but the memories remained. And now the chain had reached me. Mercer told me the only way to weaken it was to stop the chain. No stories, no photographs, no names, no questions, no witnesses. But we had already failed. The story had been told. The interview existed. The memory had spread. I asked Mercer what would happen if people heard it. He said, "Most won't notice anything." "Most?" "Some will dream." "About the door?" "Yes." "What happens if they open it?" "They become witnesses." "And if they don't?" "They remain outside." "Can the entity force them?" "No." "Why?" "Because that is the one thing it cannot do." "What?" "Make you remember." The entity could manipulate. It could imitate. It could create images. It could alter remembered events. But it couldn't force a person to form the connection. That was why it needed curiosity. Questions, stories, interviews, investigation. It needed people to choose to look. The realization made me understand why Mercer had been afraid of me. I had chosen to investigate. Nobody had forced me. I had become a witness willingly. The house was abandoned. The Voss family was gone. Mercer was old. The original evidence was almost destroyed. But the story was alive, and I had given it a voice. Mercer told me the final thing he had learned. There had been one previous person who reached the same stage, Ruth Bell, the 6-year-old girl from the 1964 fire. She had survived. She had become the first known final witness. But she couldn't carry everything. She eventually forgot. The entity fragmented again. That was why the cycle repeated. Every generation created another witness. Every witness eventually failed. Then another person became connected. The entity wasn't immortal. It was persistent. There was a difference. It could weaken. It could disappear from human awareness. But as long as one person remembered it, it could return. I asked Mercer whether he believed there had ever been a beginning. He said, "Maybe." What was it? I don't know. Could it have been human? He looked at me. That's what I've wondered for 20 years. Maybe the first entity had been a person who refused to be forgotten. Maybe the original witness had created it unconsciously. Maybe memory itself had become something alive. Mercer refused to speculate. He said speculation was another form of attention. Then the lights in the basement went out. The door appeared again. This time it was behind Mercer. He didn't turn. I could see it. A narrow wooden door, old, wet. Exactly like the one from my childhood. Mercer whispered, "Don't tell me what you see." I stayed silent. The door opened. A woman stepped through. Laura Voss. She looked exactly as she had in 1997. Not older, not dead, just remembered. She looked at Mercer, then at me. Her mouth moved and no sound came out. Then I heard her voice inside my head. "You promised." Mercer began crying. I had never seen him cry. "What did you promise?" I asked. He shook his head. "You promised to forget me," he whispered. I couldn't. Laura turned toward him. Her face changed. For a second it became Clara, then Ruth, then me as a child, then Mercer as a young man, then dozens of faces. All memories, all witnesses, all connected. Mercer understood. This is the final confrontation. With what? With the memory. The entity wasn't standing in front of us. It was moving through our memories. Every person I remembered became a doorway. Every person Mercer remembered became another. The basement filled with voices. My mother, my father, Laura, Clara, Ethan, Mercer's father, Mercer's mentor, the woman from the cassette, Ruth, all speaking at once. Not screaming, remembering. That was worse. Mercer grabbed my shoulders. "You have to choose." "Choose what?" "What you remember." "How?" "Remember only yourself." I didn't understand. He said, "The entity needs other people inside your memory." I realized what he meant. If I remembered the witnesses, the chain remained. If I remembered only my own experience, perhaps the connection would end. But forgetting them felt like killing them. Mercer said, "They're already gone." I closed my eyes. I remembered the river, the rain, the door, my childhood. But I let the other memories fade. Laura, Clara, Ruth, Mercer's past, the farmhouse, the photographs, one by one. The voices became quieter. The door began closing. The entity resisted. It showed me everything again, every frightened face, every secret, every memory. I almost stopped. Then I remembered Clara. She had once told Mercer, "It doesn't live here." She was right. It lived in people who remembered. I released the memory. The door slammed shut. The basement became silent. Mercer collapsed. I caught him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wall cracked, not physically. The image of the wall cracked, like glass. Behind it was daylight. The basement was gone. For 1 second, I saw the farmhouse, then the Voss house, then the river, then my childhood bedroom, then nothing. The memory chain had broken. At least, that was what we believed. We left Bellwether before sunrise. Mercer never returned. 3 months later, he died in his sleep. The official cause was natural. His final written note contained 3 words: "Don't let them ask." I kept the note for exactly 1 day. Then I burned it. The ashes remained. I threw them into a river. I stopped speaking about the case. I stopped researching it. I deleted the recordings. I destroyed the photographs. I stopped answering questions about Mercer. For several weeks, nothing happened. Then I received an email from myself. The message contained one sentence. "You forgot the wrong thing." I deleted it. Another arrived. "You remembered yourself." A third. "But who remembers you?" I stopped using email. The messages continued. Different addresses, different devices, always my name. Always the same question. Who remembers you? Then something happened that changed everything. A photograph appeared on my desk. It showed the Voss family. Michael, Laura, Ethan, Clara, Mercer, and me. There were two versions of me. A child, an adult. The child was holding the key. The adult was holding the camera. Behind us stood the faceless figure. But this time, its face wasn't mine. It was yours. I destroyed the photograph. At least I thought I did. I tore it into pieces, burned the pieces, ground the ashes into dust. I threw the dust into separate trash containers across the city. The next morning, the photograph was back on my desk, untorn, unburned. But something had changed. The child in the photograph was no longer holding the key. He was holding a microphone. I stared at it for a long time. Then I understood. The entity had adapted. The key had been the old doorway. The microphone was the new one. The story itself. The interview, the recording, the audience, the question. Every person who listened could become a witness. But there was still a limitation. They had to remember. So the entity had learned to make the story memorable. That was why it never needed gore. It didn't need blood. It needed images that stayed in the mind. A sentence, a face, a door, a voice. Something impossible to forget. I understood why Mercer had been afraid of interviews. He hadn't been afraid of being disbelieved. He had been afraid of being remembered. The story was not simply about the entity. The story was its mechanism. Every retelling created another potential connection. Every listener who thought about it before sleeping strengthened the possibility. Every person who asked, "What if it's real?" gave the memory somewhere to live. That was why the entity had chosen me. I was an investigator. My entire profession depended on remembering, documenting, recording, preserving. I had spent years collecting other people's stories. I had unknowingly become the perfect witness. The final discovery came from Mercer's old notes. I found them hidden inside a hollow section of the table where we had conducted our first interview. I had never noticed the compartment. Inside was a notebook. The first page contained a warning. If you're reading this, the interview already happened. I turned the page. Mercer's handwriting continued. The entity cannot cross into a person. It cannot possess. It cannot force. It can only be remembered. Then another sentence. But it can make itself easier to remember. I continued. Mercer had documented the changes over decades. Early encounters involved whispers, then photographs, then dreams, then altered recordings, then written messages. The entity became more sophisticated as humans became more connected. In the past, a story traveled from one person to another. Now a story could travel to millions. Mercer had feared what would happen if the entity ever understood mass communication. The final page contained the most disturbing statement. It has already learned the difference between a witness and an audience. I read it 3 times. Then I understood. An audience didn't have to meet the entity. They only had to remember the story. The entity could remain dormant inside memory until someone gave it attention. That was why the original case had never been finished. That was why destroying the farmhouse did nothing. That was why burning the photograph failed. The location wasn't the problem. Memory was, and memory was everywhere. I called Mercer, then remembered he was dead. For a few seconds, I simply sat there. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Nobody spoke. I almost hung up. Then a child's voice said, "Did you remember?" I didn't answer. The voice continued. "You said you would." I recognized it. It was me, 8 years old. The call ended. The phone rang again. This time it was Mercer. I stared at the screen. His name was displayed. Daniel Mercer. I answered. Static. Then his voice. "You made the mistake I made." "What mistake?" "You told the story. I didn't publish it. You remembered it. I tried to forget. You can't." "Why?" "Because you're not the final witness." Silence. "Then who is?" Mercer answered. "Everyone who remembers you." The line went dead. I looked at the notebook. The final page had changed. A sentence had appeared beneath Mercer's handwriting. "Not every witness knows they are one." I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door. Sometimes it was in my apartment, sometimes in a hallway, sometimes at the end of a church basement, sometimes behind me in a mirror. It never opened. It waited. That was worse. I began researching the history of the symbol. The door, the phrase, the objects. I found references going back farther than 1941. A diary from 1893. A newspaper clipping from 1871. A letter from 1834. Each contained a variation of the same idea. Someone remembers, someone watches, someone asks, someone answers. The earliest account wasn't American. It came from a village in northern England. A woman described a room that appeared only when she remembered a childhood dream. She wrote, "I feared the room because I knew I had been there before I was born." That sentence made me stop reading, because I had heard it before. From Clara. Not the exact words, the same idea. The memory was older than the witnesses. The entity wasn't created by one person. It might have existed as long as humans had the ability to preserve memory. Perhaps it was not supernatural in the way we understood the word. Perhaps it was something that had always lived at the edge of human consciousness. A pattern waiting for enough minds to recognize it. I stopped researching. Then the first message appeared. On my apartment wall. Not written in pencil, not painted. Scratched into the drywall. "I know you are listening." I moved. The message appeared in the new apartment. I changed phones. The message appeared on the screen. I destroyed the devices. The words appeared in dreams. I realized there was no physical escape. The only escape was not to remember. But I couldn't, because I had spent years doing exactly that. Remembering, recording, investigating, preserving. I had made memory my profession. The entity had chosen me perfectly. Then I remembered something Mercer had said. The entity cannot create a memory. It can only enter one that already exists. That meant there was still a way out. If I stopped creating new memories of it. If I stopped telling the story. If I stopped asking questions. If I stopped looking. Perhaps the connection would weaken. So I stopped. For 6 months, I spoke about nothing supernatural. I deleted my research. I stopped investigating. I lived quietly. The knocking stopped. The dreams stopped. The photographs stopped changing. I thought it was over. Then one morning, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape. I recognized it immediately. The Voss recording. The one Mercer had played in the basement. I had destroyed it. But this one was new. I put it into an old player. Static. Then Laura's voice. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, don't come back." I listened. The recording continued beyond the point I remembered. There were several minutes of new material. Laura said, "We misunderstood the thing." A long pause. "It doesn't want witnesses." And another pause. "It wants the person who witnesses all the witnesses." I stopped breathing. Laura continued. "There can only be one." The tape clicked. A different voice spoke. Mercer's. "The final witness isn't a container." Static. "He is a doorway." The tape stopped. I understood the final twist. The entity had never wanted me to carry the memories. It wanted me to connect them. The final witness wasn't the end of the chain. He was the bridge between all the chains. The Voss family, Mercer, Ruth, me, and everyone who would hear the story. The entity didn't need to possess us. It needed one person capable of making the memories connect. That person was me. The interview had connected them. The story had connected them. The photographs had connected them. I had unknowingly completed the pattern. The original Exorcism hadn't failed. It had succeeded at something else. It had removed the entity from Clara, but the entity had never been inside her. It had transferred the connection to Mercer. Mercer spent decades believing he had survived. He hadn't survived. He had been carrying the bridge. Then he transferred it to me. Not deliberately, through memory, through conversation, through the interview. The thing that could not be banished had never been trapped inside a human body. It had been passed between human minds. That was why every exorcism failed. The priests were always searching for a host. There wasn't one. There was only a witness. And now I knew why the entity had never killed Mercer, why it never killed Clara, why it never killed me. Death would end the memory. It needed us alive. It needed us remembering. And the final confrontation wasn't going to happen in a church. It wasn't going to happen in the farmhouse. It wasn't going to happen beneath the bridge. It was happening here, inside the story, inside the person telling it, inside the person hearing it. I understood why Mercer had warned me. Don't let them ask. The question itself was the first door. Who is it? What does it want? Where did it come from? Why can't it be banished? Every question made the story deeper. Every answer made the memory stronger. And yet there was one final question I had never asked. Why me? I asked it aloud. The apartment went silent. The lights went out. A door appeared at the end of the hallway. Exactly as it had when I was 8. The door opened. I walked toward it. Not because I wanted to, because I finally understood. The entity couldn't force me, but I could choose to enter. And if I entered willingly, the connection would become complete. I stopped in front of the doorway. On the other side was the room filled with objects, the photographs, the watches, the letters, the shoes, the memories. At the center was the chair. Someone was sitting there. This time I could see her face. It wasn't Laura. It wasn't Ruth. It wasn't Clara. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a face assembled from thousands of memories. Old, young, male, female, familiar, strange, human, not human. It looked at me and spoke without moving its mouth. "You finally understand?" I asked. "What are you?" The room became completely silent. Then it answered, I am what remains when someone refuses to be forgotten. That was the answer Mercer had spent his life searching for. Not a demon, not a spirit, not a god, not an angel. A memory that had learned to remember itself. I understood why it could never be banished. You cannot banish the thing you carry inside the act of remembering. I looked at the objects around me. Every one represented a witness. Every witness had once believed the entity was haunting them. But the entity had never been haunting them. It had been surviving through them. I asked, "Can I end this?" The face smiled. "Yes." "How?" "Forget me?" I almost laughed. After everything I had learned, the answer was brutally simple. Forget. Not destroy, not fight, not exercise. Forget. But there was a condition. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't document it. I couldn't preserve the memory. I couldn't even think about it deliberately. The moment I told another person, the chain would begin again. The entity would survive. I looked at the door, then at the objects. I began letting them go, one memory at a time. Ruth, gone. Laura, gone. Clara, gone. Michael, gone. Ethan, gone. Mercer, gone. The farmhouse, gone. The Voss house, gone. The river, gone. The key, gone. The door, gone. The entity remained. It was the last memory. I could feel it resisting. Not violently, almost sadly. It whispered, "You will remember." I said nothing. "You always do." I closed my eyes and forgot. When I opened them, I was standing in my apartment. The door was gone. The lights were on. Morning sunlight came through the window. For the first time in months, I felt normal. I looked at my desk. There was nothing there. No photograph, no cassette, no notebook, no key, no recorder. I checked my computer. The files were gone. My research was gone. Everything was gone. I had succeeded. At least I thought I had. Then I noticed something. My recorder. It was sitting on the desk. The same recorder from the first interview. The red light was blinking. I hadn't turned it on. I picked it up. The recording contained nothing but silence. I almost threw it away. Then I heard a voice. Mine. Not my adult voice. My childhood voice. It said, "You forgot the story." A pause, then, "But you didn't forget the person who heard it." I stopped the recording. I stared at the device. There was only one problem. I was alone. No one had heard the recording. At least I thought nobody had. Then I opened the file information. There was a timestamp. The recording had been created that morning at 11:43, the exact time the Voss clocks had stopped. The file contained one final line of metadata. Listeners, 1. I was the only person in the room. I checked again. Listeners, 1. Then I realized what it meant. The entity had never needed an audience. It needed one witness, one person who remembered, one person who could carry the memory forward. I had spent months trying to forget it. But forgetting the story was not enough, because I still remembered that there had been a story. That was enough. The final door appeared one last time. Not in my apartment, not in a photograph, not in a dream. It appeared inside the recording. I could hear it opening. Slowly, then footsteps. 3. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. A child laughed. Then the voice said, "Now tell them." The recording ended. I never released it. I never published the interview. I never told anyone Daniel Mercer's real story. I destroyed every copy. But I am writing this because I finally understand the flaw in his warning. He believed the danger was remembering the entity. He was wrong. The danger was remembering the witness. Because as long as someone remembers the person who remembers the thing, the chain is still alive. And if you're hearing this now, then someone has already remembered me. And somewhere behind a door that wasn't there yesterday, something is waiting for you to ask the one question it has been waiting to answer. Who are you?